This story is called Anomaly, and when I saw it, I really enjoyed it, so I wanted to share it with you because I think you may like it too. It starts off with, "Hello. I guess I should say up front that I'm new here, so be patient with me as I don't know all the rules or the etiquette or whatnot. A friend of mine linked me to this board after I told him the story and showed him the materials that I'm about to share with you anonymously for reasons that will soon become clear. Okay, so here's the deal. I'm a production editor at a small independent publisher in the US. For the last 9 months, I've been working on a book that everybody at the office was very excited about. An older guy had contacted us out of the blue, and he offered us the chance to publish his rare archival photo collection, provided that we treat the subject matter with the respect and the seriousness that he felt it deserved. To use his word, the photos were all anomalies. That was also going to be the book's title. When I say they were anomalies, what I mean is they depicted something out of the ordinary or otherwise inexplicable, something that usually had an equally interesting story to go along with it. And most of these photos are from the first half of the 20th century. Anyway, the guy was offered a large sum of money for the photos elsewhere, so he no longer needed our services. I figured that someone should benefit from all of that hard work, and that's why I'm here. Unfortunately, I don't have the high-resolution scans that I made of the photos, but I did keep working drafts of the original captions and the medium-resolution placeholder images. Just to be clear, I don't claim anything with regards to the veracity and provenance of these photos. I'm not here to convince you that they're real. I'm just putting them out there because I think they deserve to be seen and not simply hidden in some rich prick's private collection. The Collinwood Fire. This is the last known photo taken inside the Lakeview School in Collinwood, Ohio, before it was consumed by fire on March the 4th, 1908, killing 172 students, 2 teachers, and 1 rescuer. The fire started when a ceiling joist ignited from a nearby steam pipe. Flames blocked the escape routes, which led to panic and a stampede that trapped a large number of victims in a stairwell where they burned alive. Additional casualties were incurred when burning students jumped from the 2nd and 3rd story windows. Everyone in this photo perished, except for Mr. Olson, who is seated at the far right in the back row. The spectral artifacts in the photo remained unexplained. Charlie Noonan's last interview. Charlie Noonan was an amateur folklorist who traveled throughout the South and the southwestern United States during the early parts of the 20th century, and he would collect tall tales and stories of the supernatural. According to his wife, Ellie, Charlie was told a story by an Oklahoma farmer that was about a strange woman who lived alone on an isolated property in the Panhandle. The farmer claimed that the woman was not actually a woman at all, but she was something else. Something that hid its true nature beneath a headscarf and was never seen without a large dog by its side. Noonan was apparently intrigued enough to try to search for the woman during one of his research road trips. He was never seen again. Ellie Noonan was later contacted by a Tulsa pawnbroker who remembered reading about her husband's disappearance in the papers after finding his name engraved on a camera that was sold to him by an itinerant. The pawnbroker returned the camera, and Mrs. Noonan had the film inside developed in the hopes of finding a clue as to his whereabouts. This was the only photo on the roll. Unfortunately, neither the location of the property nor the name of the farmer who told him the story was recorded in Noonan's notes. The death of John Ulsted. This prophetically torn photograph depicts a regimental color guard of the Union Army 1 month before they marched into battle at Antietam. The gentleman on the far right, his name was John Ulsted, and he had the right side of his face and his right arm blown off by cannon fire at the start of those hostilities. It's unknown exactly when the damage to the photo occurred. The Grand Caverns Cryptids. This photo was taken in 1895 by an amateur spelunker and photographer named Orrin Jeffries while exploring an unmapped section of Grand Caverns in southwestern Virginia. At the time this photo was taken, he was conducting photographic experiments to see if anything at all could be captured in the total absence of light, otherwise known as cave darkness. He would situate himself on level ground, he would extinguish his lantern, and then he would open the lens of his homemade box camera for as long as he could stand the darkness. During one of these experiments, he heard something approach from the deeper recesses of the cave. This really spooked him, so he abandoned his experiment, and he set off the flash powder that he used to take traditional photos underground. And according to a report that he later gave to a local newspaper, he saw 3 humanoid creatures staring at him from the shadows, and he took off running in the other direction, and he didn't stop until he was out. But several days later, he returned with 3 other men to retrieve his box camera, and this is the image that was recorded on the film inside. The Sorrenson Tragedy. The Sorrensons were a Danish family who immigrated to the U.S. around 1905 with their oldest child, Anders, which is seen on the donkey in this picture, and they settled on a farmstead in Missouri. They had 3 more children, Simone, Frick, and Mathilde, and this photo that was taken in 1916 captures all 4 of the children a few weeks before the horrific tragedy. The 3 oldest kids were apparently playing fort in the hay barn, and they must have fallen asleep. Their father, Nicholas, drove a wooden hay sweep into the pile, and they were dismembered in locations accurately suggested by the flaw in the photo. Mathilde, the youngest, was inside the house with her mother at the time, so she wasn't hurt. And according to the son of a neighbor that was later interviewed by the author, the donkey later died in an equally hideous fashion. The Disappearances of Mrs. Yurno. During her later years, Josephine Yurno would take a walk every evening at dusk around her beloved neighborhood in Norwich, Connecticut. On November the 12th, in 1935, she set out as usual, but she didn't return. Extensive searches were conducted by a large team of volunteers and the police force, but no sign of her was ever found. But 3 years later, she was found squatting in front of a neighbor's house without a mark on her body. When asked where she had been, she wasn't able to understand the question, because from her point of view, no time had passed at all. Against the advice of her neighbors and her doctor, she refused all medical treatment, and she resumed her life as if nothing had ever happened, including her nightly strolls. Another neighbor snapped this shot of her in the fall of 1938. Clouds of smoke from piles of burning leaves give it an appropriately eerie feel. And on the same date, in November 1940, 5 years after her initial disappearance, she vanished again, but this time she didn't return. The Specter of Viola Peters. Viola Peters was a spinster from a highly esteemed family who lived alone in the small town of McKaysville in Georgia. She was loved in her community for her contributions to the Baptist church, the soup kitchen, and the local orphanage, especially during the Depression. In July of 1935, she was brutally assaulted and murdered by a drifter named Tom Cullen, who had worked briefly at the nearby copper refinery. Cullen continued to stay in her house, and he horrifically mutilated her body for an additional 17 days before he was captured. A posse of enraged locals stormed the jail, and they took Cullen and hanged him from an old bridge. This photo was taken by Garrett Killian, a witness to the and it caused quite a stir when it was published a few days later in the Atlanta Constitution. To most, it suggested that Viola's spirit achieved some measure of peace by seeing his punishment carried out. But some twisted minds saw in her sad expression a longing to get one last look at her one and only lover. Lily Palmer's eyes. Lily Palmer wasn't quite 4 when she experienced what her doctors would later call an acute onset of sensory hallucinations. This photo, taken by Lily's mother Annette on Halloween night in 1952, purportedly captures the arrival of her disorder. Lily and her nanny were sitting out for a round of trick-or-treating when Lily suddenly screamed and she began to claw at her eyes. It was some time before she was calm enough to speak, but when asked what she saw, she repeatedly said that things were crawling in her eyes. And several days later, while she was unsupervised in her bedroom, she punctured both of her eyes with one of her mother's knitting needles. And after receiving medical treatment, she was evaluated and committed, and she remained institutionalized for the rest of her life, first at Bellevue on the east side of Manhattan, and later at the Rockland Psychiatric Center in Orangeburg, which is where she remained until she died of a heart attack in March of 2001. A call to one of her former caregivers at Rockland confirmed that Lily's episodes were most traumatic on and around Halloween night, but for the majority of her life, she could be heard begging and pleading with the staff to help her get these things out of her eyes.